In this series of lectures on more comprehensive nutrition, one of the things that we keep seeking to do is to inform individuals that they have in their power the choice and the amount of different nutrients to improve their quality of life at a lower cost. And this is emphasized because the World Health Organization uh, released the figures that the United States has the highest cost per citizen per year healthcare costs, and it's rapidly increasing, while on the same farm used for members of the United Nations, the United States rated last time number 35th in quality of life and health status. So number one in cost, number 35 in benefits. And the ability to change this is in each individual's hands. And nutrition is a very important part of it. Another thing that long ago it was recognized by even Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, that nutrition combined with exercise improve quality of health. And we now know that lifestyle, avoiding excesses such as burning trash and sucking it into the lungs is not healthy. Any type of plant material that you volatilize, and excess alcohol and even excess food is not healthy because obesity is a terrible weight on health as one ages. So with this, I want to go with some of the research that Carrington Laboratories sponsored after having the founder of Carrington Laboratories had a small company called AvaCare and had 12 products made with aloe vera leaf gel. And the company raised $20 million in investment capital to search for what is in aloe vera leaf gel that is of support to health. And the goal was to make a FDA approved drug, but it had absolutely no toxicity that we could not give the FDA the LD50 and the LD100, which means the lethal dose that it takes to kill half the animals and the dose to kill all the animals. And there must be a wide window or they will not allow you to proceed further in the development of a new drug. Well, all our efforts were thrown out by the FDA because number one, no toxicity whatsoever could be shown, and number two, everything that the aloe oligosaccharide was added to, whether it was physical disability from normal health, mental or emotional, improved when you added this to the diet. And the reason is that the biochemistry of our lives is operated on the combination of nutrients that are hooked together in cellular synthesis to make bioactive molecules to run all the systems. So with this, I will start with this lecture. Thank you. As I have pointed out, that we have these lectures on nutrition in hopes that individuals will recognize that within their body by their choices of food and combined with exercise, which is very important. And then lifestyles are also important. You need proper rest and sleep, and along with exercise, and that you need to avoid things that are deleterious to the health. But we really focus on what we discovered is the value of nutrition, which was quite a contrast to what I was taught through pre-med and medical and 2 residency programs that was pretty much centered on the drug pharmaceutical paradigm, but that in the coding of the genes in every cell in your body controls cellular synthesis of how nutrient molecules are added together. And there was a small company about 10 miles from where I'm sitting right here in Irving, Texas, that the owner of the company was named Clinton Howard. The company was named Avacare, and he had 12 aloe vera leaf gel products. One of them was a aloe beverage called Carolo. And in 1984-85, at the peak of the panic over AIDS, and I say panic, it was primarily confined to homosexual males and prostitutes and drug addicts, but there was the fear it was going to break into the general population, and so people were terrorized. Well, during this period of 84-85, Clinton Howard received 7 short statements. They were faxes in, there weren't any emails and cards, that 7 individuals in 7 states had drunk his Carolo, and they had been bedfast, waiting to die from this virus or this infection of no known cause and no treatment. And they more or less ended their statement to him. Was able to go back to work or back to school, and I thought you would want to know. Well, Mr. Howard came to my office at Dallas-Fort Worth Medical Center and wanted my assistance as a consultant, as a medical doctor, to help them in their efforts. That he had established a new company called Carrington Laboratories and raised $20 million with the goal to find out what was in the aloe leaf gel that caused these patients to be able to go back to work or to their schooling. And I originally said, no, you need to go to medical school, infectious disease specialists. They're set up to do these type of things. I'm not qualified to help you. But they wouldn't go away. And actually, I found out about 2 years later, he had been trying to do that, but no one at a medical school would give him the time of day, even though he had money in regard to developing something from the aloe plant. And I have a FDA physician's IND. It's called individual physician's examination. And what we did is that I didn't believe that the 7 patients benefited from aloe, and I felt like that they should repeat a little pilot study with medical observation, and that I would show him that the aloe would not be of any benefit, and save spending their money on a wild goose chase. Well, in the New England Journal of Medicine, a article written by Dr. Robert Redfield, at that time a young physician, wrote a paper on evaluating and staging AIDS patients. And we took that paper and all the criteria that he followed and made a form, and we followed 15 patients under all the requirements of the FDA to do a pilot study, and started out with the aloe drink that had been reported to be a benefit. And to my amazement, they started reporting they were feeling better. Before it was over with, they sent a white powder made from the aloe gel, which I immediately ordered a protest that when you start a study, you don't change what you're doing in the middle of it. It's like changing horse in the middle of the stream. However, they said this is not a pilot study to be published. This is for guidance of the company. And we want to know if what we develop in this powder is the same thing that's in the drink. Well, actually, the patients did better on the concentrated powder because the solids in the aloe leaf gel, it's about 98 to 99% water, and this 1% was made from the solids. They did better on the powder. Lo and behold, in 90 days, these 15 patients on the criteria was in the New England Journal improved 72%. Well, in our hospital, we had a family practitioner that had a number of AIDS patients. So he did 25 patients. And in 90 days, using the same criteria and all, they improved 69%. And these total of 25 and 15 patients were given to a biostatistician. And even though we had no controls and the biostatistics were, there's a 90% probability that what we were doing was a benefit to the patients, and that it was a basis to do more studies. So I was totally wrong in that I thought I would be able to show them that giving AIDS patients aloe leaf gel was worthless. It was of value. And before it was over with, for Carrington Laboratories, I did a total of 45 patients in 3 different pilot studies trying to support the efforts of the company to make the active ingredient from the aloe a new antiviral drug. Well, the problem was with the FDA that they want to know from you in the early stages in toxicity studies how much of the material it takes to kill 50% of the animals and how much of the material to kill 100% of the animals. It's called the LD50 and the LD100. There needs to be a wide window between that, or they won't let you go to the second stage in drug development. Well, to have the benefits we were seeing and have absolutely no toxicity was medical paradigm heresy. And that's one of the reasons they threw us out. Now, the second thing is it hadn't dawned on me that medicine is oriented one drug, one disease. Well, this was the next problem we had with the FDA, that it didn't matter if the individuals had a deviation from normal that was physical, mental, or emotional. They improved. And that too is heresy and not wanted. We didn't get into the fact, didn't progress to the fact that the cost of the aloe leaf gel was so economical that it was virtually dirt cheap as compared to a new drug in patent. Well, the FDA kicked us out, which is big pharmaceutical companies, watchdog and attack dog. We had all of this, as I may have mentioned, that Carrington Laboratories raised $20 million to try to develop this new drug. And we had 12 academic institutions doing basic science research that the FDA required. So we had all this data that we got thrown out of because of lack of toxicity. And in 1994, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act was passed, which founded the supplement industry formally in the United States. And it took us a little while, but we finally recognized that one of the academic institutions had shown that the active ingredient in the aloe was acetylated mannose, also called acemannan. and that it is utilized in cellular synthesis to make a domain on the surface of all cells of the body. And this domain is a site for cell-to-cell instructions and information. And it's another long story, but a biochemist was born in Nigeria that came to the United States and got his doctorate up at North Texas University. And in a rainstorm in the winter, he was delivered to the little laboratory of Carrington Laboratories. And while waiting for a taxi to take him to a place, Dr. Bill McAnally found out that his doctoral thesis was on separation of carbohydrate units, or the identifying the sugars that make up carbohydrates. And Dr. McAnally hired him right on the spot because this was an area of research very few people had any interest in. And in fact, when I was in medical school, the idea was that carbohydrates were burned for energy, and that was about it. Well, they found out with more current research, the carbohydrates, and particularly the sugars, do a lot more than just be a source for energy. Well, before we get through here, we will proceed down to Texas A&M School of Veterinary Medicine, which was the main academic institution that did research for Carrington Laboratories. And they had a professor there, Dr. David Busby, that had a National Institutes of Health grant to search for natural products that would be used for anti-cancer activity. And one of his models was murine Norman sarcoma, which was notorious for the fact that though it was a survey model to look for plant substances that would be anti-cancer, that it had a history of 100% lethality, regardless of what was done for the animal to try different techniques or materials. And the one injection of the aloe acemannan, 41% of the animals destroyed all evidence of the sarcoma. And with 2 injections a week, he got up to about 65% survival. And to combine it with surgery, he got up to a 90% survival rate for this survey model. And this was all done down at Texas A&M. But in addition, they had a group there that were involved in vaccines, and they had experimental vaccines against horse viruses that I had never heard of, the viruses, that they could not get protective levels to stimulate antibodies against the virus. By adding just a small amount of the aloe acemannan, these horse vaccines were made very effective, actually got protective levels like they had never seen before. And this led to the next thing that I want to point out, that Carrington Laboratories had a small laboratory in the Trinity Valley in Dallas, and that they had found that under the microscope that you could put white cells, looking at them under the microscope, and put a little of this acemannan, and these cells became very active, and they engulfed bacteria or particles much more avidly. The white cells were activated and stimulated. In tissue culture, they found out that the active ingredient was effective against common viruses, pathogenic viruses that affect humans, and also bacteria. And they found out that wounds in rabbits heal faster. And one of the things is they were trying to figure out what was in this, and they made a powder from the leaf gel, and they wondered the nature of the molecule that was responsible for these benefits, and it was not destroyed by heating in the microwave, which was subjective evidence that this probably wasn't a protein made up of amino acids or either fatty acids, because heating would destroy the bioactivity, but only the carbohydrates would be resistant to the heat. And they were able to show that in this little lab that particles of the aloe acemannan could be taken inside the white cells, and that engulfing is called phagocytosis, to take them inside the cell. And you could do special stains for carbohydrates, and that would last for about 5 days. It was like it was time release inherent with the particles from the aloe plant. Well, these were some of the things that were done in preparation to make decisions of what to send to academic institutions and try to guide them. Now, as I said, Texas A&M School of Veterinary Medicine was the #1 outside academic institution that did a lot of work, and they took kittens. Actually, they took 20 kittens that were weaning size, and they took 10 of them, and in meatball, they put 35 milligrams per kilo of the aloe powder that they produced, and gave it to the 10 kittens, and then they flushed down their nose a feline rhinotracheitis virus, which is the model for the common cold in animals, which is the upper uratory viral infection. And 8 of those cats that had been given the aloe and the meatball didn't get any symptoms whatsoever. 2 of the cats had runny eyes and lassitude for about 2 to 3 days, and it was over. Well, they had 10 controls, and they did not give them any of the acemannan, but they gave them meatball with nothing in it. And then they flushed the rhinotracheitis virus down their nose, and there was 100% infections of lassitude, fever, laying around like they've got a cold. And they were sick for 30 days, and 1 died of pneumonia. So that was pretty good evidence that this activity progressing from tissue culture to a small animal had antiviral activity. I told you about the horse vaccine. Well, having found this out, the people that were working in research with vaccines immediately went to a chick antiviral trivalent antiviral vaccine that was made by Solvey International of Belgium, though they have facilities here in the United States too. We were quite disappointed they quit on the horse vaccines, because everybody was from Texas and horses rate real high, and all of a sudden here they turned to chickens. We said, this because they're so cheap. They says, don't you know that the #1 use of vaccines, all vaccines, is on chickens, because you feed out thousands of them for the market. They go to the market, and then you start another batch 2 or 3 times a year. And so those that you give the vaccine to end up in the market, and are eaten, and you do some more, and you keep using vaccines. So it's a #1 commercial use of vaccines. So they started doing the chickens, and they got results that amazed them about the benefits, kind of like the horses. Also down at Texas A&M, Dr. Chena got his doctor's thesis on research that he did on the adjuvant properties of this aloe acemannan, boosting antibody production in horses and chickens. And so at this point, we had objective evidence of 2 major classes of animal viruses were inactivated by the active ingredient from the aloe acemannan. Well, Solvey took the kind of the opinion that these people down at Texas A&M didn't know what they're doing. They had spent years developing their trivalent vaccine, and they could get a 60 to 65% herd protection with its vaccine. Now, the herd protection thing is more research has been done in chickens than anything else because of the thousands of observations that you can make easily and rapidly. But Texas A&M had reported a greater than 90% herd protection with their vaccine if they just added a little bit of aloe acemannan to it. And they did extensive research that I'm going to show you, trying to determine could there be any truth to what they were being told by Texas A&M. And what we see there is a brochure outside cover that the results of their research done at Solvey. And as you say, the biggest thing to come along in years, and I'll be telling you why they say this, and they call the acemannan, the vaccine that they'd had for years, trivalent vaccine. And when I say trivalent, it was against the virus for Newcastle virus for hemorrhagic bursal disease of chicken, and also Marek's virus. So those are the, shall we say, childhood virus infections of baby chicks, which you're more familiar with the trivalent of humans, which is for DPT, diphtheria, pertussis, whooping cough, and tetanus. So it's we're talking about 2 trivalent vaccines, one in chickens and one in children. Now, the Solvey was found a hard time believing what they were getting in a few hundred or thousand chicks. So eventually contracted with 11 broiler companies to do chickens with and without vaccine that has the aloe acemannan added to it. And the total number of chickens that were done in these studies was 21 million, which is nearly 22 million when you add the 890, 812 chicks there, that it's nearly 22 million. Well, the first thing they were able to prove with this large N value of observations that their flock protection of 60-65% rose to 90 or greater than 95% protection with their vaccine if you just added a little bit of almost undetectable amount of the aloe acemannan to it. Fact is, the protection level for the herd was so high that when the baby chicks are born, they take them in and they debeak them, and they put a drop of this vaccine up their nose, and they do it so fast that they thought possibly it would be 100% if they would slow down, that the lack of being 100% protection was because of failure to get the one drop of vaccine in the nose just right, that it was human error. The second thing they found, which really got my attention to want to know about it, that the chicks gain more weight on less chow. And if you know anything about commercialization of animals for food, this is highly significant. The third thing they saw is this Marek's virus is notorious because if the chicks get it, it is the #1 cause of loss in the broiler industry. You feed out the animal, you catch it, take it to the processing plant, remove the feathers, the legs, and clean it up, and it's ready to either be sent to the market or chopped up for the different parts for the restaurants. And the FDA inspector there says burn it to an ash, because in the skin you see these yellowish white blotches that are evidence of T-cell lymphoma, a malignancy. And so they have all the expense of the chicken and is burned to an ash, and that's the number one cause of loss. And this was highly significant to the broiler industry to eliminate the Marek's virus. And it probably took about a year or two for us to recognize that Carrington here was a known cause in nature to cause a malignancy, the Marek's virus, and that it was totally eliminated by adding the aloe acemannan to the vaccine, which stimulated a lot of projected potential benefit in human. Now, when you have thousands of chickens in these broiler houses, you have some that are not as strong as others, and you have about 1% mortality. You just find the chickens dead in the house. Well, this was reduced by almost a percent, and that was significant. Also, after you feed them out and you take them to the processing plant, the carcass just looks bad and all, and they call it a condemnation. And this reduced the amount of condemnation of the chicken carcass. And that the food conversion was improved. They gained, again, as we set up there in number 2, more weight on less food. They converted the chow at a better rate to make chicken meat. Now, this is a study for the Marek's virus protection with the plain vaccine, which is the maroon there. At day 1, 2, 3, and 4, when you challenge the chickens, do they have protection? And you can see that by adding the blue grouse, that you have much rapid onset of protection against the Marek's virus at day 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is a viral protection against all 3 at 4 days. And with the plain vaccine, you had about 50% of the chickens were protected against all 3 viruses, whereas with acemannan, it was 70% had been protected in 4 days. Again, very positive benefit. This is Newcastle and hemorrhagic bursal viral protection. And at 4 days, with the plain vaccine, it was about a 50% protection against these 2 other viruses that are combined with the Marek's. And you had 88% protection in 4 days. And of course, as time goes on, that protection rose, but this is done at 4 days, contrasting the plain vaccine versus with just a little bit of acemannan added. This is 23 broiler companies and a total of 400,000 chicks. And this is the protective index that they were getting for the line. You can see that it approaches very high level, all of them but one. And in biological systems, you never get 100%. And here we saw one that they couldn't detect any, and then one down there about 10th or 11th, one is good, but the average was a major improvement in protection yielded by the vaccine that had the acemannan added to it. In the different broiler companies, depending on the weather, they have a heat get too high, and this can cause chicken death. And they had 6 companies that had heat stress flocks, and this shows the chickens had a better recovery and ability to handle high heat if they had the aloe acemannan added to their vaccine, protection against high temperatures. This was the feed efficiency that got my attention so much, and it was only a 0.034% improvement in food conversion, but you multiply it by thousands and you can detect it. And by the thousands, it becomes significant, because if you multiply any number by 15 or 20,000, and of course in this group there was 22 million, you get into money in a hurry in terms of efficiency of food production. But the dark blue is the conversion rate of when you have added to your vaccine the aloe acemannan. Now, this gaining more weight on less food really got my attention. And so I went into great detail with people that work with these baby chickens. And what they told me is that with the standard vaccine, that when they put the chicken back into the house, he just stands there, doesn't eat or drink for 24 to 36 hours. And he's not very big, but he loses some weight. And he raises his wings up and fluffs all his down and squints his eyes and kind of crouches. And if you look at it, you think that chicken doesn't feel good. And this small amount of hours compared to the period of time that they feed them out, with the numbers we're talking about, you can tell and detect this failure to grow and add weight and actually lose a little bit of weight because of the high numbers of observations. However, if you gave the vaccine with a little bit of acemannan in it, you put the chicken back into the house, they start eating and drinking them immediately. They don't fluff their feathers or squint their eyes or act like they feel bad. They just immediately start eating. And of course, with this huge numbers, if your time of feeding is 76 days, you can detect 1 to 1.5 days when the chicken is feeling bad. Now, this stimulated some interest in the human sector for me, because in my travels, which at this point is up to 15 different countries all over North America, time and again, a parent would bring a child to me, usually between 8 and about 12 years old, in a wheelchair with a board across the arm things, with its head down, slobbering, and not responsive to words. And over again, the parent would say, "My child was perfectly normal until the doctor made us take the DPT shot." Now, first thing you probably know, if you have any children at all, that when you get the DPT shot, there's about 100% the child is irritable and cries and gets a mild fever, and certainly doesn't want to nurse or eat or drink for hours, and they sleep poorly. In fact, is one of the real common complaints is the parents can't sleep either, and they're up all night with this child reacting to the standard DPT shot. Well, sometimes they get high fever and a seizure, but a vast number of children totally recover, and you can't ever tell they ever had the DPT shot. However, I told you about these that were brought to me in the wheelchair, and there was something that you don't know that kind of hit me heavy. is that in my medical training, I had a pediatric professor that cautioned us, if your mother tells you my child is sick, I don't know what, you better pay close attention, because a mother knows its child better than anybody else, and certainly than any doctor. And if a mother tells you their child is sick and you can't immediately find it, you better really search again harder, and never let such a child even go out without doing a spinal tap to make sure there aren't white cells in the spinal fluid, and that this is early encephalitis or a viral infection that's affecting the brain. And so when these mothers would tell me over and over again, this child was perfectly normal, I didn't want to believe that, being a physician, that any doctor would do anything that would cause this type of total wipeout of the future of these children. I mean, they were just not developing in terrible condition, physically and mentally. And I didn't want to believe that the DPT shot caused that. And the fact is, the medical profession didn't want to believe it either. And it's very controversial, because vaccines are the most economical public health measure against infections. Sewage processing and water processing and refrigeration have done great things to decrease disease and add to longevity of humans. But nearly all of these, if you really look at it, very expensive. Fact is, sewage processing and water processing for a city is in the millions of dollars, whereas vaccines are virtually pennies compared to dollars in terms of the benefits you get. So there is a certain amount of economic pressure to view vaccines favorably. But as I say, it's controversial. But this bothered me, because these baby chicks that got the standard vaccine reminded me so much of these children that got the DPT shots. And then to have the chickens have absolutely no symptoms when aloe acemannan is added to the vaccine begins to make you ask questions, because in my travels, I also had parents come to me telling me how their child on the first DPT shot was irritable and crying and fever for about 24 to 36 hours, but totally got over it. Some of them had a higher fever and maybe even a seizure, but got over it, and you couldn't tell anything had ever happened. But they were very hesitant to ever have this second DPT shot. In fact, they only did it because the pediatrician says I won't see your child in my practice, or they can't get them into a school or a nursery without their second DPT shot, so they're forced to do it. However, during the interim, the more comprehensive nutrition, dietary supplementation that I was involved with in the research had been adopted by the family, and the child got it too. And they would tell me how the second DPT shot, when the child had been taking a supplement with the aloe acemannan in it, it was just like they injected them with saline. No irritability, no crying, no fever, no failure to eat or drink, and not crying and fussing all night long. It was like the response of the child that had been exposed to aloe acemannan was like the chickens that their vaccine had the aloe acemannan in it. And of course, this has been something that's worried me, and feel like we should do something about it, but there's the reality that it's very difficult to get research funds to do drug research, much less for nutrition. And then you've got to get parents that some of them would be willing to say take the DPT shot without the aloe acemannan, and then those that would get it, because you've got to reveal to your subjects that there will be controls, and you would have to have a control, and it would cost millions of dollars to do this, and you have to have an investigational review committee go over your protocol and say that it's worthwhile doing. But there are medical schools that have these investigational review boards that have never approved a study to be done in children, because if there's any adverse effects, it could affect them for the rest of their life. And even some medical schools will never approve a study in a female that's in childbearing age, that they could possibly get pregnant while they're taking this intervention. And so it's a lot of problems about trying to do the research I would like to see done with DPT shots with and without the aloe acemannan. Well, this is the published manuscript that Solvey had, and for their researchers that worked with the 11 broiler companies for the 22 million baby chicks. And as I frequently say, all these conclusions that I showed you, 22 million baby chicks can't be wrong, because there's almost virtually no type of investigation that you can do for health that approaches what you can do with chickens. This is just to point out that on the left-hand column, the different firms, they have them by number and the size of their flocks, and that they had the acemannan treated column there, and then they control vaccines, the number of animals they had, and then the difference between them and the percent changes. And of course, they're talking about a decrease in adverse findings. The first one's 47, and if you go on down, there's only 2% and one no change. But then you got one that's 100%, 50%, 80% decrease in adverse findings, and the average was 43% decrease across these 11 broiler companies in regard to adding the acemannan to the trivalent vaccine. Now, this is a financial analysis they did, what Solvey did, and that they got the data on all this, and the return on investment, what it costs to do it, was a 71% return on investment. And I was instructed that from this point on, with this research, that Solvey put aloe acemannan in all their vaccines. Now this is a totally different subject, but it relates to significant antiviral activity. As I pointed out, the baby chicks for the rhinotracheitis virus, which is the model for the common cold. Well, at this time in our history, the number one panic was over the AIDS. And the researcher for this primarily was Dr. Jasbir Cologne. And one of the professors down at Texas A&M was in graduate school with Dr. Cologne and knew her personally, and knew that the National Institutes of Health had given her over 300 different compounds to test against the AIDS virus. And she is the one that published the first paper that AZT was effective against the AIDS virus. Well, he was able to get her to test the aloe acemannan in her models against the AIDS virus, and this is the title of the paper she published, Inhibition of AIDS Virus Replication by Acemannan in Vitro, in other words, done in cultures. And this is the abstract of it. And the significant thing is that she didn't do any published papers on AZT because she said that the AZT killed the cells that the virus was being proliferated in. And she had hesitations about how this should be given to any human. Whereas with the aloe acemannan, she published 2 papers. This is one of them. And she went to conferences and gave oral presentations. And I happened to hear her down at the University of Alabama giving a presentation on this to the heads of Carrington Laboratory. And at one point, she kind of quit talking and was looking out the window, kind of like in a fugue state. And her boss says, "Cologne, are you okay?" And she says, yes, but I was just looking out at the window at all the buildings for this medical school, and that the economics for the next 5 to 10 years is pretty well based on grants that will be issued to try to develop something for the AIDS virus. And that if it's good as this appears, there will be no need for additional research. And I was just wondering what in the world they're going to do to keep things going, because you have to have grants to be able to do research. Of course, what she didn't know is that the FDA had eventually turned down this for being a drug, and that the professions and medicine and the hospitals and the clinics and even the population are so drug oriented that the fact that the aloe acemannan is a dietary supplement just doesn't turn the wheels that to accept this. But the point I was going to make, even to date, I strongly suspect the safest, most effective management of the HIV virus infection is the aloe acemannan, because we also had similar benefits clinically in hepatitis virus, hepatitis C, and the other viruses that cause hepatitis. But I won't go into the mechanism of action that Dr. Cologne went into, but she did very detailed molecular biology to show why the AIDS virus replication was stopped. And this next paper shows that not only did Dr. Cologne show that the acemannan was antiviral against the AIDS virus, but is antiviral against the herpes virus, and that this paper showed that took less AZT, which AZT stands for azidothymidine, that's what AZT stands for, and acyclovir, which is effective against the herpes virus, that it took less of the drug when you combined it with the aloe acemannan. And of course, what she didn't publish is that if she had done the studies with the aloe acemannan alone, that the viral production is stopped. Well, this is an example from the laboratory of Dr. Cologne. In the far left, you see the tissue culture, that the cells, this is about 100 magnification, are all well spread out, similar size, and there's no viral changes, or cytopathology it's called. That's the control. There was no herpes or AIDS virus in it. What you see in the middle is what happens to a culture if you put either the AIDS virus or the herpes virus in it, and those dark areas are called syncytial plaques, where the cells fuse together and actually their cytoplasm merge together. And that's the type of a viral infection. Well, to the far right, you see the cultures that they put the acemannan from the aloe plant in the culture media and then introduce the virus, and you see no effect of the herpes or the AIDS virus. And this is just a visual presentation of what those papers were showing in the cultures. Now, as we progress, we started out in tissue cultures, and then we had the weanling cats, and now the J.E. Thompson was an ENT specialist, and he reported over 350 patients he'd seen over a 4-year period that they suffered from allergies, from various viral infections, nasal itching, pain, coughing, sneezing, vertigo, tinnitus, one dizziness and ringing in the ears, sore throat, that he saw significant improvement for all these conditions if the patient were getting the aloe acemannan. The paper down there, G.D. Marshall is head of immunology at the University of Texas, Houston, and he took white cells. This is a basic science experiment, and it's mixed white cells, and on a graduated dose, he cultured them with the aloe acemannan, then washed the cells and put them on cells, and they attacked virus-infected cells, but they also assayed the serum and found out that molecules that are made by cellular synthesis to turn on a host defense or the immune system are increased by the amount of aloe acemannan in the cultures of the white cells the night before they collect the fluid. In other words, that the antibodies are higher level, that the interleukins, the prostaglandins, the interferons increase in the amount in the fluid of the cells with the amount of increase in the aloe acemannan. That's basic science type of research. Well, at the University of Texas in Dallas, Dr. Heldeman showed that in patients, by drawing their serums, that the immune systems were turned on a dose response basis, just like the basic science cultures of Dr. Marshall, which coordinated human response to basic science response. And down at the bottom, we point out that I was medical director for a company that was a charity that's goal was to provide aloe acemannan products to children whose parents could never afford it. And they were particularly giving this to orphanages in Africa. And we got unsolicited emails from the head of these orphanages that they had children in bed, confined to their bed with chronic malaria. Before this happened, I wasn't aware of it, but the World Health Organization has the data that the number one cause of death of children on planet Earth is chronic malaria. And what happens in chronic malaria is that they have these parasites in their blood that the mosquitoes spread, and they have episodic fever and chills and red cell destruction, and they quit growing, they revert, and that's the number one cause of death from this chronic malaria. Well, what they were informing us that on very low amounts of the aloe acemannan that these children were given, they quit having fever and chills. Their blood smears for the malaria virus, or not virus, the malaria parasite went negative. They got out of bed, began to grow, went back to school, And before it was over with, we got reports that they excelled in athletics, that their neuromuscular coordination and their ability to face fatigue and performance was markedly increased in these formerly chronic malaria patients. And this was done by, as shown by Dr. Marshall, by the host or the child's organ of the immune system and cells that make antibodies and fight against infections are boosted. The last thing there is I've received a phone call from 3 very excited physicians in Hong Kong during the SARS epidemic that they had there. And the reason they called me is because a distributor of the dietary supplement of that period that contained the aloe acemannan was given to them, and that they had elderly and very young patients with the SARS virus that in their experience, they would probably die within the next week. They started the more comprehensive nutrition orally in these elderly and young patients. And in a week, they went home free of symptoms from the SARS virus. And so that is the other evidence that humans respond well to this. Now I bring up a point that caused us great consternation, is that we thought for at least 2 to 3 years we had the world's most incredible immune and host stimulant, because this did not work against the biochemistry of the bacteria or the virus, which antibiotics and antivirals do. They poison the infectious agent. This aloe acemannan is utilized by the cells to boost the body's defense mechanisms of their white cells and of their soluble anti-infectious agents that are made in the liver and in the lymph nodes. And also it boosted the bodies. We thought we had the world's greatest immune host defense stimulant. However, I think of not only several, but particularly a 9-year-old female in Oklahoma that had nearly died 2 times in pediatric ICU from the tachycardia of status asthmaticus. And at that time, I was amazed to find out that there are about 15,000 deaths a year of children in the United States that die from this status asthmaticus. They get such a high heart rate, up to over 200, that they die of cardiac exhaustion. Well, the mother of this child saw our scientific posters that had been given at conferences and says, I think this might help. Rosie was her name. And in fact, she was started on the aloe acemannan and never had another emergency room visit, doctor's visit, and certainly not an ICU again. And she grew up and now went through a pregnancy and has had a child and never had asthma again from taking aloe acemannan. Also, the second paragraph there is I had a furious, irate Colorado pediatrician call me on the phone and chew me out for interfering with his doctor-patient relationship. That he had a little boy that all the tests for cystic fibrosis, which is a gene defect that affects primarily the lungs, and they get their lungs destroyed by chronic infection, and it's a terrible disease. But this child, I think it was an 8-year-old boy, got on the aloe acemannan, and all his tests went negative, like his sweat tests and everything you do for cystic fibrosis, and he no longer needed the medications that were being prescribed. And I just kind of laughed at the doctor that he was irate because the child no longer had a disease. This is one of the defects, I think, in our medical system in the United States. If you know anything about world history, in China, they used to have a practice that you paid your doctor all the time that you were well and doing well, but if you got sick, you quit paying him. Well, in the United States, the only way a physician or a hospital or a clinic can get paid is you got to be sick and you got to prove that they're sick. And there are oftentimes many medications you can't even get dispensed unless you can prove, and the insurance company won't pay for it, that you got to prove you got a disease. Well, this doctor was irate over this child that no longer showed any evidence of the disease he was getting paid for taking care of. Anyway, this led to an encounter with the National Cystic Fibrosis Foundation that claimed that we wouldn't cooperate with them, which was not true. We told them that the company at the time would provide the product if they would do a study. Well, that's another subject. I just wanted to point out that this research on the aloe acemannan started out as a middle of the road basic science, conventional standard science and medicine. But time and time again, as you step back, I don't know whether this got across to you today, that there are incredible provisions that are written in the code of our genes for our body protection, and that in the plant kingdom, molecules are present that are required by our genes in cellular synthesis to make bioactive compounds that optimize our health. And the point I wanted to make is that human beings have recognized for as long as history can be found in archaeological records, that something mysterious is going on, that there is a creative organizing and designing power active in the universe. And there have been many efforts and words used to try to describe this mystery of how incredibly wonderful and marvelous the human body is, and the biochemistry and the physiology, that how did this come to be? Well, in our public schools and in universities, they have, and it's spilled over into medicine and pharmacy and the sciences, that there is no divine dimension to human existence. But I think again and again, if you really study what's going on, you have to come to the conclusion, as I have, and I don't hesitate to tell you, that there is a creative, organizing, and designing power in the universe that has created life and all the systems in our body and how they work, and just how this all came to be is one of the biggest mysteries that still remains and faces humans. And with that, I want to bring this to an end. And I hope that you have gotten something out of this lecture. I frequently point out that I like to go to the symphony orchestra over in Dallas. I can't play an instrument on the stage and I don't read music, but I can appreciate the music. And I hope that in these lectures, if you don't understand the science and if you can't go telling other people about it, that you can appreciate the wonder of how life has come to be and how our bodies operate, and that it's all under control of our genes, and that we have been provided for. In fact, is my first book that I wrote. It's called The Gift, a Primal Provision. So with that, I want to end this lecture. Thank you.